So, a very warm welcome back, everyone. Last week, we learned about JSON Web Tokens and how to make your APIs secure, which is using JSON Web Tokens, you prevent unauthorized access to APIs. Today, we are going to continue building on that and learn few important concepts today. So, let me share my screen without further ado and then we get started. So, last week, we built our API where we had auth routes and protected routes, and you could register a user or you could log in using our API. So what do I mean by that is you could provide email ID, which was used for credentials and password, and you would get a authorization token back. This token was subsequently needed to call any protected routes in our application. So what do I mean by that? Let me remove the authorization header. When somebody tried to access our Node.js backend without providing the authorization or the token that is necessary to validate if they are a real user or not, they could not access the system. And we simply returned a 401 status call unauthorized and prevented them. Uh, if they provided the right token, let's provide the right token that we got when we logged in. We got protected route access securely, and we got the data. Uh, any confusions on previous week's project, how the JSON Web Token works, and how did the authentication middleware work? Um, real recap. We are looking for a header called authorization in every request that comes, and we are verifying this token using the JWT configuration we have defined, and we are uh, saying if this is a valid route or not, if a valid request or not. Where is my auth middleware? Yes, valid request or not. Uh, this is where we are generating the token when they first log in and also verifying the token when they uh, subsequently try to access our APIs. And each token is made up with a secret phrase and an expiry, how long the token is valid for. In our case, we've specified as 1 hour. Today's lesson is building upon this cool stuff that we have learned and moving towards a real world working environment where in a traditional team you will be working with more than one Node.js developer slash backend developer. And one of the key elements while working in a team is uh, you get uh, ability to show your APIs without looking at the code to somebody else by just means of Postman. And the beauty of the Postman is you don't need to build a front end while you test your APIs. Now, this is still a Postman collection that is running on my machine. And if I was working as a developer with some of you guys, I need a way for you guys to have exact same Postman collection so that we are working on the same thing. So for that, the Postman provides multiple ways to do that. This is a share feature that they provide where you can copy a link which is hosted on a Postman server But this will not, sharing like this will most likely be not allowed when you go and work for a company because the APIs that you build are proprietary APIs of a company. Anybody has confusion on this aspect, you will not be able to just simply share uh, from copying a link. So to still share and work collaboratively in the environment where you are, you can use Postman's another share feature which exports the data as a JSON. So you can go to the three dots that you see, then click on more and then export here. When you do this, it gives you export as a JSON file JSON is data structure, data type that we have been dealing with for a while, and uh, you can export it and then save. And now I have a JSON file that I can import. Important topic that I want to cover today is, but before we go to that topic, it, there is a subtopic for that needs to be covered. So we have been very familiar with this kind of objects, which are nothing but uh, JSON objects, right? So this is a JSON object where we have a person who has a name, age, and hobby. A lot of times the configuration system uses not JSON but something called YAML. YAML is alternative of JSON. It is less machine friendly but more human friendly. You describe your object as if you will be writing it in a human language. So here we are defining a person and name, age, and hobbies directly. We have no curly braces, no quotes around properties, and no, again, big brackets around arrays. A normal, how would a human perceive? This is much, much more easier for a human to read and understand. The key differentiator between YAML and JSON is in JSON you provide different kind of brackets, curly bracket or big bracket, to define what specific things mean. This means an array, this means an object. Here in YAML, the core concept is indentations. So you indent uh, any sub details of an object by some consistent spacing, usually two spaces. So this defines that name is a property of person and hobbies is an element, coding is an element in the hobbies. So you define elements of the array by dashes and you indent two spaces before you define those. So let's say coding was not just an element, but an, a kind of an object. You'd say what kind of coding you like, and you could say, I like Node.js coding, and let's say HTML. So this becomes elements of coding object. So essentially, this would be a wrong structure, but that's okay. You guys get the gist of it. Uh, what we are essentially saying is we are converting the complex looking JSON to a simple readable YAML format. And this is Postman is a great tool, and you guys must use it while you build your APIs. But it is not the only way to share the details. In fact, there is a foundation called OpenAPI, which endorses a system called Swagger. I repeat, Swagger, which helps you share as well as uh, design the APIs right from your code. So even before you write your APIs, let me remove this. And I'll share all of this code so you guys don't need to worry, okay? Um, so OpenAPI provides something called Swagger, which helps you build the APIs and write the specification of the APIs. So even before you write your APIs, write the documentation of what your API will do. This is a documentation of an API. It says it's a get call, it's a server health check, what's the API call, and returns a message indicating API is running. So here you are doing two good practices. You are commenting your code for anybody in the future or yourself in the future to refer back to the code and understand what is going on. And two, you are creating a living document right inside your project, and you are able to then use this document using Swagger to test your APIs just like you would do in the Postman. So we will see this in a moment. But before you go to Swagger, you need to install two additional dependencies, Swagger JS docs and Swagger UI. This will help you have uh, a dedicated place, just like Postman, to test your API, Swagger UI, and we'll see it. But the core of Swagger is this kind of a documentation, which starts with at Swagger. So this is called annotation, and Swagger runs through your entire code and looks for this annotation at Swagger. Whenever it finds it, it builds a Swagger documentation in the background, which you are able to then view in the browser. So if you see the structure of Swagger, it's a YAML structure. Now you can do it in the JSON, but YAML is much more preferred. That's why we looked at YAML. But it's a get call with the properties of summary, tag, and different kind of responses. What is the response? API is running. So without further ado, let's take this URL. So once you install the dependency and once you install the dependency and open the URL that dependency provides you, but before you you will see something like this, a Swagger UI, and this is the server health check. Well, ignore the top ones for now. We will look at them very soon. This is the this line that you see, this blue line, it's a get call with a URL of slash and the description of server health check. This is coming from our documentation. So this is the documentation we provided. Server health check. Let's update this. Sometimes you need to clean the cache, but that's okay. So this API is server health check API. Returns a message indicating the API is running. Again, coming from here, returns the message that API is running, and API And you, just like Postman, can run this API right in the Swagger UI itself. So when you hit try it out, you can execute the API and you would get a documentation that authentication API is running. And also you get all the headers. So we have been used to seeing this kind of a response. Let's let's run this. We have been uh, used to seeing this kind of response in Postman. Swagger does that same for you. And now this Swagger UI is living right inside your project. So tomorrow, if another developer clones your project and starts working on it, they can go to Swagger API, Swagger page, Swagger documentation page, and look at all the APIs that are there. So what is more detailed example of this, which will make more sense? So we in our last project had login where we could provide our username and password and get this login credentials. So let's look at the documentation for login. So we are saying API auth login. This is the route. So this is what we see. It's first and foremost, we are saying it's a post API with this route, API, and there's a description. We are login existing user. And then we define what the login credentials should look like by providing schema of our uh, login credentials. So we are telling that this is how a new user should look to use our login API by providing an example of email and password. And what you this is even before we are running our APIs. We get two or three kinds of responses. First is if your login is successful, you will get a token, uh, or you might get a 401 invalid credentials. Let's correct this invalid credentials, and uh, there'll be a message attached to it. Error response. We are right now hard coding our error response, uh, which is like error, but you'll get some sort of error message. And even server 500 error, we'll get some sort of error response. So even before I run the API, by just looking at the Swagger UI, collaboratively, I can understand the entire documentation for this code that starts from line 252 to 288. How should I be working with that code? Is by providing this kind of credentials. And what should I expect as output of that code? I should expect as 200, 401, or 500 response code. So let's simulate this, right? So we got a 200 here in the Postman. And if I gave a wrong credential, I got a 401 that wrong user doesn't exist. You could pretty much do the same thing in the Swagger as well. So this is an alternative to Postman. Uh, and you can hit try it out and you provide the exact same input and hit execute. And now we are seeing that we actually got a response, server response, which gives us a login credential and headers. Now we also get headers in the Postman. We never look at them. We always get the header, but so response is our body. So let's say if I had provided a wrong credential, we would have seen that response here as well, invalid credentials. And uh, we would have been blocked as well. So this is very basic of Swagger. Swagger is a good alternative to Postman, but I would say in a day-to-day development, Postman is more preferred. But Swagger is really, really good for sharing the documentation of your API. Uh, what's a one good case, right? So let's say you guys are building a e-commerce platform in a team of two, or let's say team of four. Two people are working on shopping cart and two people are working on billing. Now, billing might be your own Node.js project and shopping cart might be another um, Node.js project. Now, the two people that working on the Node.js shopping cart project, when user hits on the checkout button, they need to call APIs from billing. But the people who are working on shopping cart might not have any idea of how to call the billing APIs. In that case, if these APIs are hosted and they are able to look at the Swagger documentation for those APIs, they can go back and start calling the APIs because now they understand what is the quest body that needs to be sent and what is the response going to look like. They can even execute and play with it, or they can actually look at the living documentation of actual API. That is one great example. The other great example is uh, you don't even need to write any code. Let's say, for example, we had not yet built our login functionality. Uh, we were still working on our login functionality. We were still building on our code. Response.json login. Let's say we are still working on it. Let me see. What's this? Okay. So when we log in, okay, what's happening? Oh, that's why our even Swagger documentation was not updating because I was running the start, not the dev. But let's say we haven't built our login API yet, and we are just returning some dummy message. Hey, login API call. But because you have a Swagger message, right? And we can always summary being worked on, you could still release the Swagger documentation without actual implementation here and tell that, hey, I plan to take this kind of a body. I plan to make this API as a post API, and it will give this kind of response. Even though if you try it out and you don't get that kind of response, you don't need to pass any of this nature, and it still works. You are telling somebody that, hey, I'm working on it. This is what I intend to do. And if you're building, let's say, a front end for this, you will build based on this documentation. So Swagger provides you, which I like the most, is to think about your code before you start writing the code. Because writing the code itself is easy. Once you have all of these things identified, you can always write your code and execute your logic. So this Swagger really helps in the design phase of your APIs. When you are working with multiple developers again, multiple teams, Swagger helps you um, ensure that all of you are on the same page and collaboratively you are able to understand understand what is going on in the big project. Now, Swagger also provides an uh, ability to sort of do the protected routes as well, like with the JWT. So let me execute this to show you quickly. I need to copy. So we execute this, we get our token back, and we have provided the documentation for our protected routes that we built last week. Let's copy this token. And here are our protected routes. So let's try it out, execute, and we are getting 401 unauthorized because we have not provided the token that we got in the login. You come here, provide the token, and authorize it. Now try it out. We see that we got the response back just as we would have expected in case of Postman as well. And we see that the Swagger for ourselves added this header authorization bearer. So we did not have to go and provide this ourselves, but Swagger did it because we had it um, authorized. The benefit of that is we will be able to uh, call other subsequent APIs without needing to provide the tokens because Swagger will inject it for us. And you can always come here and hit a logout to clear the credentials. And again, we get the unauthorized message. So Swagger can handle this kind of stuff as well. And it's Swagger is something that is very famous as well in the tech community, especially in the backend development. And my suggestion is when you're in an interview setup, do mention about Swagger, along with the postman to show that you are somebody who is really well versed and understands multiple ways to do documentation and sharing of your project. So that is that about Swagger, YAML, and Postman sharing. Anybody has any questions?